Okay, second round of presentations for today. We're gonna start out with the title, Không phải dạng vừa đầu, which is, or when you translate it to English, it means not your average type of person. Or you don't fall into a particular category or the average category. And it's a counter narrative of Asian American students navigating through high school. We can start with a statement of the problem in which COVID-19, the pandemic, was the start of a conversation for the Asian American community to come together and to talk to others about the consistent and constant issues that have existed since the arrival of Asian Americans in the country. The major problems is invisibility and is the lack of attention to issues such as health, social economics, academic, and social issues that Asian American experience. It leads, and one of the predominant issues is the model minority stereotype, and it downplays the struggles of Asian Americans and it only highlights these successes, and it in turn creates a predetermined perception for Asian American students. And that leads to others thinking that Asian American students are always the hardworking type and usually are financially well off. They don't need no emotional and financial support, and they are high achievers, in which in some cases that's not always the narrative, right? Um, there are several research questions that are going to serve as a guide for this qualitative study. And the first question you can find at top, and are Asian American students aware of dominant narratives that perpetuate the community? The logic reasoning for this one is that different students, different at different age levels and different generations experience different things. For a person like me, I know that I experienced racism, but for students that are born later in like 2007, they may not know what racism may be depending on where they are and what community they live in. Um, the second question is, what are students doing to resist or to embrace stereotypes placed on them by their peers and their teachers? And how does this in turn have how do Asian American students conceptualize their racial and ethnic identities? Um, Going to the literature review, theoretical framework is Asian Crit, which is an extension of CRT or the critical race theory, and it focuses on dismantling the dominance of narratives. And some of the tenets include Asianization, transnational context, reconstructive history, strategic essentialism, anti-essentialism, and intersectionality. Asianization is basically acknowledging the fact that there is nativism and then is racism in social public institutions, and we're just trying to dismantle it and acknowledge that there is something wrong. Um, some of the works, part of the literature review for my particular research is great because these researchers and studies are fairly new, and there's a lot of them that are located within 2022 and 2023. 2022 from on focuses on the exposure of Asian American history in the United States curriculum, in which it does Asian Americans don't show up a lot. 55% of the standards, so national standards, talk about being oppressed. And I mean, maybe 16% of all the standards talk about the successes. Um, it leads to us talking about the assimilation paradox in Li Sheng, which is about Asian Americans giving up their identities to be a part of a bigger majority community in the United States. So giving up parts of their language or their culture to fit in. And it leads to another issue as well. All this connected. In 2023, Sun released something about linguisticism, in which first generation Chinese immigrant parents are telling their kids to focus more on English rather than their native tongue so they can be more successful in their professions, their social lives, and The logic reasoning is if you know English, you probably won't get bullied as much. You don't have an accent, you won't get bullied. Others will think you're American, you'll be accepted more. And it just leads down a rabbit hole of like students balancing their identities. Um, Also, so students that are noticing invisibility depending on the professions. For example, medical students, they were Asian American students, medical students that had lacked the emotional support during the pandemic compared to others. And then there's also another case, another research study in 2017 by Asalon and Fan, which also talked about Asian American students being either conflicted about their identities, being colorblind to racism and stereotypes, and being content in which they embrace their stereotypes. Um, Going to methodology, it's important to recognize my epistemology as a critical constructivist, which means that I acknowledge that there are multiple realities and different lenses and different meanings. Everyone thinks a different way, and that is cool because that's your reality. It leads us to creating a narrative inquiry or narrative study or based on counter narratives. This will be taking place at Creekside High for the sake of the pseudonym. 6.1% percent of the student population is Asian American. And for this particular study, I'm aiming to absorb at least 6 to 8 participants that are part of ASA, Asian Student Association, that I run. And this is purposeful sampling. Um, this is because there are different years in which I've run the association where we have experienced different issues or problems. The first year, we might have ran into a lot of microaggressions from adults and students all around. Compared to the most recent year we had, it was inviting, the community was inviting in school, and it was normal. We didn't run into a lot of microaggressions. So was that the case? What was the case for that, and what reasons might be behind that? How do students feel about that? Um, there are going to be semi-structured interviews. We're aiming to do around 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. So this will allow time in between where participants can go home and reflect on their responses and allow me time to actually go back and do annotations. Some of the questions that I may ask students here, and which is good about these semi-structured interviews, is that I can ask them in different ways and structure them in different ways depending on who the student is. As an Asian American, are you aware of any stereotypes? How do you feel about that? Are there any times during the school year where you have faced racism or discrimination? And if so, how does that make you feel? What did that make you feel about your identity? Did you have to give up something or try to hide part of your cultural identity to fit in? What is going on? Or how do you even try to break stereotypes? That is what I'm trying to aim for. Data analysis, it's gonna come in 2 phases. Color coding, which is something that our cohort is very familiar with, which enables me to go back and look at transcriptions and just pick out just the general words that pop up a lot or may carry the same meanings and connotations. And then that will make it easier for the second phase of coding, which is in vivo and generating themes. And that will go back to Asalon and Fan in 2017, where they did the same study with college students and recognizing who was content, who was trying to break the barrier, who was conflicted about their identities. Member checking and analytic memos are a way to establish rigor, but I also want to add in for the sake of pseudonyms as well. Maybe participants can choose their own pseudonyms to establish some sort of an agency for their identity and their responses and what they could say as a different alias alias. There you go. Maybe under a different name, they're more open to talk about their cultural identity. So we'll see where it goes from there. The subjectivity, which is also important to recognize that even though this is a counter narrative for students rather than an autoethnography, I'm also not dismissing the fact that what I'm doing and the data that I may be collecting will be reflective of my own experiences. And that leads to me um